IB Biogenetics Part 5 will examine the use of pedigrees to understand the heredity patterns in humans. The pedigrees displayed in this movie will review the following heredity patterns: dominant recessive and sex-linked. The essential idea is the inheritance of genes follows patterns. Here is an outline of all the available movies in the genetics unit. Use this outline to find the movie you need for review. This movie is focused here. Pedigree studies are used to identify the hereditary patterns in humans. Because humans do not have large numbers of offspring, therefore it's difficult to determine meaningful ratios for the purposes of understanding heredity patterns. So we use known information on family history to determine heredity patterns and to calculate probabilities of having offspring with certain traits. A study of family history is known as a pedigree, and we use pedigrees in genetics. You must think logically, use deductive reasoning, and use probability thinking. This is a pedigree of the disease cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis is an inherited disease caused by a recessive allele not on the X or Y chromosome. Now, if I hadn't given you all of this information, could we have determined the nature of the heredity of this allele from the pedigree? The answer is yes. Follow closely. If the disease were dominant, then in order for Jane and Daniel to have had a daughter with the disease caused by the dominant allele, one of them, Jane or Daniel, would also have had the disease. One of them, Jane or Daniel, would also have had the dominant allele. Since neither has the disease, neither has the dominant allele, the allele must be recessive. Is the allele on the Y chromosome? No, because a girl has the disease. Girls have no Y chromosome. Is the allele on the X chromosome? Well, if the recessive allele were on the X chromosome, the daughter of Jane and Daniel would have this genotype. The daughter would have inherited one of these two alleles from her dad. But her dad is healthy, and he has only one X chromosome. Therefore, he did not have the recessive allele to pass on to his daughter. Thus, the allele must be autosomal recessive. As such, Jane and Daniel are heterozygous, as are the parents of Jane. Ingrid and Richard are homozygous recessive. Once again, cystic fibrosis, a recessive autosomal allele. Let's pretend we don't know that information, and we'll use the pedigree to determine whether it's dominant recessive or whether it's X-linked or Y-linked. Let's start. If the disease, the allele, were dominant, then one of these two parents would also have had the disease in order to pass it on to this child. Neither of them has the disease, so neither of them has the dominant allele, so the disease, the allele, is not dominant. It's recessive. Is the allele on the Y chromosome? No, because females display the disease and females have no Y chromosome. Is the allele on the X chromosome? No, this mother would have this genotype, and she would pass one of these two alleles to all of her sons, including this son. This son does not have the disease. He's healthy. He's not received that allele from his mother, so the disease cannot be on the X chromosome. There is one other way of showing that the allele is not on the X chromosome. Stop the movie, see if you can find it. I'll give you a hint. It's in the relationship between this father and this daughter. Here's a pedigree about albinism, a hereditary condition expressed as low skin pigment. Let's be perfectly transparent to prevent confusion. Albinism is not an X-linked allele. It is a recessive autosomal allele. But let's pretend we know nothing about albinism, and we'll start by asking questions. Is albinism caused by a dominant or recessive allele? Albinism is a recessive allele, and you know this because these two parents do not have albinism. Yet each parent passed the hidden recessive allele to this child. If the allele were dominant, then at least one of these two parents would also have been an albino. Is the allele X-linked? No, And here's the way to approach your thinking using an if-then thinking process. If the allele is X-linked, then female C would be homozygous recessive and would pass the allele to all sons who would express the condition. None of her sons are albino, therefore the allele is not X-linked. Or another way to think through the question, follow the if-then thinking pattern. If the allele is X-linked, then this father with normal skin pigmentation must have a dominant allele on the X chromosome, and then he would pass that allele for normal pigmentation to all daughters. But we see an albino daughter here. Thus, this allele is not X-linked. Since albinism is a simple autosomal recessive allele, A and B would be heterozygous, C would be homozygous recessive, D marries into the family, and the allele is rare. Thus it is probable that D would be homozygous for normal pigmentation. Here's a multiple choice based on the same pedigree for albinism. You ought to be able to handle this relatively quickly. The phenotype of individual C is best explained by the fact that this individual received an allele for albinism from, it's not A, because fathers don't give Y chromosomes to daughters. It's not B, because the father has normal pigmentation, but the daughter is albino. It's not C, because mothers don't have Y chromosomes to give. It's D. The phenotype of person C is best explained by receiving an autosomal chromosome from each parent. Knowing that albinism is a recessive autosomal allele and looking at the pedigree, you know that persons A and B are heterozygous and child C is homozygous recessive. What is the probability that the next child of parents A and B would have albinism? Hopefully you could work this out to be 25%. Here's a pedigree following a rare, negative, deleterious allele. You can stop the movie now or follow along with me. Is the allele dominant or recessive? The allele is recessive. As you can see, the expression of the allele has skipped generations, masked by dominant alleles throughout. And if the allele were dominant, then one of these two parents would have to express the allele to have a child with the allele. The allele is recessive, and these parents are heterozygous. It is not X-linked because if X-linked, this father who does not have the condition would pass the dominant allele to all daughters. Thus, no daughters would express the condition, but there is a daughter with the condition. Thus, it's not X-linked. It's not Y-linked because there are females with the condition, and females have no Y chromosomes. This pedigree is a bit easier, and I'm asking these questions. The allele must be dominant, because if these two individuals, both expressing the condition, were homozygous recessive, then all of their children would be homozygous recessive and all express the condition, but not all express the condition. Therefore, the allele must be dominant. It's not X-linked because if the allele were X-linked dominant, then all daughters of this father would express the condition. This daughter and this daughter do not express the condition, thus not X-linked. Hopefully by now you know that an allele on the Y chromosome would never ever appear in females. This allele is not on the Y chromosome. This pedigree is a bit more difficult. You can practice on your own by turning the movie off now or follow along. The allele is expressed in generation after generation after generation, and that's a hint that it might be dominant. Also, the frequency of offspring with the condition from each of these crosses is high, 50% or more, and this is typical of crosses with dominant alleles. Go back to review movie 2, particularly the story on Huntington's chorea, if you're not sure. Lastly, notice whenever there is a cross where both parents do not have the condition, all of their offspring also do not have the condition. This is evidence that all these individuals are homozygous recessive. Now, all of these ideas lend evidence to the hypothesis that the allele is dominant. Now, is the allele X-linked No. If it were X-linked and dominant, then this father would pass the allele to all daughters. But this daughter does not express the condition, thus it cannot be X-linked. Or, if it were X-linked and dominant, where would this son get the allele since the mother does not have the allele to give? It's not X-linked. A pedigree is a document to record ancestry in the study of human family lines. Use this pedigree to confirm that the allele being followed here is an X-linked recessive. I'll let you do this work on your own. Here is an ABO blood group question. Can you determine Michael's blood type, his genotype, and the genotype of Michael's spouse? You need to recall that there are 3 alleles in the population and that A and B alleles are codominant, while both A and B alleles are dominant to O. Michael must be type A because he passes an A allele to one son. Michael must have the genotype A-O as he passes the O allele to a type O son. Michael's spouse must have the genotype B-O because Michael's spouse passes an O allele to the O son. The O son is homozygous O, receiving an allele from both Michael and Michael's spouse. Here are more difficult ABO pedigree questions. What blood type does grandfather 2 have? What is the genotype of grandmother 3? And what's the probability that grandchild 8 has blood type B? What's the probability that grandchild 8 has blood type O? Turn the movie off now, or follow along with me as I move to the next slide. Grandfather 2 could be type A or AB, as he must contribute an A allele to his daughter, daughter 5. Daughter 5 is type A. Daughter 5 is heterozygous, A-O. The spouse of daughter 5, male 6, is also heterozygous, B-O. He received the B allele from his father and the O allele from his mother. Turn the movie off now to figure out why he must have inherited an O allele from his mother. See me in class if you're not sure. So if the parents 5 and 6, are heterozygous, AO and BO, then grandchild 8 has a 25% chance of being O and a 25% chance of being type B. Here's a pedigree I've shown you before for red-green color blindness. You might remember that red-green color blindness is caused by a recessive allele on the X chromosome. My question is, knowing that person T has red-green color blindness, could T have inherited the allele from person 7 or 6 or 4? And the answer is no, because this father of T would have only given the Y chromosome to person T, not the X. So person T with red-green color blindness would have inherited the allele from his mother. That mother could have received the allele from her father or from her grandmother on her father's side. Person 2 would not have contributed this allele to 5 simply because person 2 gives the Y chromosome to 5, not the X. The mother of person T could have received the allele from her mother, who could have received it from her father or her mother. I've discussed red-green color blindness earlier, and you may already know that the red-green colorblind allele is an X-linked recessive. But could we determine the heredity pattern not knowing anything? Is the allele on the Y chromosome? Well, no, because here we have a female with the condition, and females have no Y chromosomes. Is the allele dominant? No, because if it were one of these two parents, would have to express the dominant allele, given that they have a child with the condition. Is the allele on the X chromosome? Well, yes, likely, given the high frequency of males with the condition, and all of female 11's sons would be affected, and they are. Male 5 and female 6 both have the red-green color blindness allele in their families, and when they had children, daughter 11 received a recessive allele from both. Here is the pedigree following the recessive allele for hemophilia in the royal families of Europe. This is an actual pedigree. Males are squares, females are circles, and notice the high frequency of males with hemophilia. This is a clue that the allele is X-linked. All of the unaffected mothers of the males with hemophilia are carriers. They are heterozygous. They have an allele, single recessive allele for hemophilia. This would include Queen Victoria, Alice, Beatrice, Victoria, Alice, Alexandra, and Irene. Remember, X-linked traits appear more frequently in males because males express the only allele they have. The heterozygous state for X-linked genes does not exist in males. There is no masking of the recessive allele. Remember, sex-linked inheritance is in contrast to the inheritance of traits on autosomes, where both sexes have the same probability of inheritance. Here's a pedigree you've seen in part 4. It's a question about an allele on the Y chromosome. You're given the information that males 2 and 14 have hairy ears, and you're asked which men in this pedigree have hairy ears and identify each by number. I'll tell you that all the men have hairy ears. Can you see why? And that brings us to the end of IB Biogenetics Part 5.